Tonight, as you drift asleep, we will explore Book 1 and 2 of the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. So begin to absorb yourself in a reverie of today's topic. Meditations by Emperor of Rome Marcus Aurelius. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, his Meditations or Discourses with Himself, Book 1. The example of my grandfather Verus gave me a good disposition not prone to anger. By the recollection of my father's character, I learned to be both modest and manly. As for my mother, she taught me to have regard for religion, to be generous and open-handed, and not only to forbear from doing anybody an ill turn, but not so much as to endure the thought of it. By her, likewise, I was bred to a plain, inexpensive way of living, very different from the common luxury of the rich. I have to thank my great-grandfather that I did not go to a public school, but had good masters at home and learnt to know that one ought to spend liberally on such things. From my governor, I learned not to join either the green or the blue faction on the race ground, nor to support the Parmularius or Scutarius at the gladiators' shows. He taught me also to put my own hand to business upon occasion, to endure hardship and fatigues, and to throw the necessities of nature into a little compass, that I ought not to meddle with other people's business, nor be easy in giving credit to informers. From Diognetus, to shun vain pursuits, not to be led away with the impostures of wizards and soothsayers who pretend they can discharge evil spirits and do strange feats by the strengths of a charm, not to keep quails for the pit, nor to be eager after any such thing. This Diognetus taught me to bear freedom and plain dealing in others, and apply myself to philosophy. He also procured me the instruction of Bacchius, Tandasis, and Marcianus. He likewise put me upon improving myself by writing dialogues when I was a boy, prevailed with me to prefer a couch covered with hides to a bed of state, and reconciled me to other like rigours of the Grecian discipline. It was Rusticus that first made me desire to live rightly and come to a better state, who prevented me from running into the vanity of the sophists, either by writing speculative treatises, haranguing upon moral subjects, or making a fantastical appearance or display of generosity or discipline. This philosopher kept me from yielding to the charms of rhetoric and poetry, from affecting the character of a man of pleasantry, from wearing my senator's robe in the house, or anything of this kind which looks like conceit and affectation. He taught me to write letters in a plain, unornamental style, like that dated by him from Sinuessa to my mother. By his instructions, I was persuaded to be easily reconciled to those who had misbehaved themselves and disobliged me, as soon as they desired reconciliation, and of the same master I learned to read an author carefully, not to take up with a superficial view or assent quickly to idle talkers. And to conclude with him, he gave me his own copy of Epictetus's Memoirs. Apollonius taught me to give my mind its due freedom and disengage it from dependence upon chance, and not to regard, though ever so little, anything uncountenanced by reason, to maintain an equality of temper, even in acute pains and loss of children, or tedious sickness. His practice was an excellent instance that a man may be forcible and yet unbend his humour as occasion requires. The heaviness and impertinence of his scholars could seldom rouse his ill temper. As for his learning, and the peculiar happiness of his manner in teaching, he was so far from being proud of himself upon this score that one might easily perceive he thought it one of the least things which belonged to him. This great man let me into the true secret of receiving an obligation without either lessening myself or seeming ungrateful to my friend. The philosopher Sextus recommended good humour to me and showed me the pattern of a household governed in a fatherly manner. He also bade me make nature and reason my rule to live by. By his precedent, I was instructed to appear with an unaffected gravity, to study the temper and circumstances of my friends in order to oblige them. I saw him bearing with the ignorant and undiscerning, complacent and obliging to all people, so that his conversation was more charming than flattery, and yet at the same time he was held in the highest reverence by others. Conversing with this philosopher helped me to draw up a true, intelligible and methodical scheme for life and manners, and never so much as to show the least sign of anger or any other disturbing thought, but to be perfectly calm and indifferent, yet tender-hearted. However, he let me see in himself that a man might show his goodwill significantly enough without noise and display, and likewise possess great knowledge without vanity and ostentation. Alexander the grammarian taught me not to be ruggedly critical about words, nor find fault with people for improprieties of phrase or pronunciation, but to set them right by speaking the thing properly myself, and that either by way of answer, assent, or inquiry, or by some such other indirect and suitable correction. Fronto taught me that envy, tricking, and dissimulation are the character and consequences of tyranny, and that those we call patricians have commonly not much fatherly feeling in them. Alexander the Platonist advised me that without necessity I should never say to anyone nor write in a letter that I'm not at leisure, nor make business an excuse to decline frequently the offices of humanity to those we dwell with. I learned of Catullus not to slight a friend for making a remonstrance, though it should happen to be unreasonable, but rather to endeavour to restore him to his natural humour. That like Domitius and Athenodotus, I should always speak well of those who had the care of my education, and that I should always preserve a hearty affection for my children. I'm indebted to Severus for the love I bear to my relations and towards justice and truth. He likewise made me acquainted with the character and sentiments of Cato, Brutus, Thrasea, Helvidius, and Dio, and gave me the idea of an equal commonwealth with equal rights and equal speech, and also of a monarchy where the liberty of the subject was principally regarded. To mention some more of my obligations to him, it was of him I learned not to grow wise by starts and sudden fancies, but to be a constant admirer of philosophy and improvement, that a man ought to be generous and obliging, hope the best of matters and never question the affection of his friends, to be free in showing a reasonable dislike of another, and no less clear in his own expectations and desires, and not to put his friends to the trouble of divining what he would be at. I learned from Maximus to command myself, and not to be too much drawn towards anything, to be full of spirits under sickness and misfortune, to appear with modesty, obligingness, and dignity of behaviour, to turn off business smoothly as it arises, without drudging and complaint. Whatever he did, all men believed him, that as he spoke so he thought, and whatever he did, that he did with a good intent. He attained that greatness of mind, not to wonder or start at anything, neither to hurry an enterprise, nor sleep over it, never to be puzzled or dejected, nor to put on an appearance of friendliness, not to be angry or suspicious, but ever ready to do good and to forgive and speak truth. And all this as one who seemed rather of himself to be straight and right than ever to have been rectified. Nobody ever could fancy they were slighted by him or dared to think themselves his betters. Besides all this, he had an agreeable wit. In my adoptive father I observed a smooth and inoffensive temper, with great steadiness in keeping close to measures judiciously taken, a greatness proof against vanity and the impressions of pomp and power. From him a prince might learn to love business and action, and be constantly at it, to be willing to hear out any proposal relating to public advantage and undeviatingly give every man his due, to understand the critical seasons and circumstances for rigour or remissness, to have no boy favourites, not to stand upon points of state and prerogative, but to leave his nobility at perfect liberty in their visits and attendance. And when he was upon his progress, no man lost his favour for not being at leisure to follow the court, to debate matters nicely and thoroughly at the council board, and then to stand by what was resolved on, yet not hastily to give up the inquiry, as one easily satisfied with sudden notions and apprehensions. To be constant to a friend without tiring or fondness, to be always satisfied and cheerful, to reach forward into the future and manage accordingly, not to neglect the least concerns, but all without hurry or being embarrassed. Further, by observing his methods and administration, I had the opportunity of learning how much it was the part of a prince to check the excesses of panegyric and flattery, to have his magazines and exchequer well furnished, to be frugal in his expenses without minding being lampooned for his pains, not to worship the gods to superstition, not to court the populace either by prodigality or compliment, but rather to be sober and firm upon all occasions, keeping things in a steady decorum without chopping and changing of measures, to enjoy the plenty and magnificence of a sovereign fortune without bragging and yet without making excuse, so as freely to enjoy them when present, but when wanting, not to be mortified at the loss of them, and to behave himself so that no man could charge him with sophistry or buffooning or being a pedant. No, he was a person mature and perfect, scorning flattery and thoroughly qualified to govern himself and others. As for those that were philosophers in earnest, he had a great regard for them, but without reproaching those who were otherwise, nor yet being led away by these. He was condescending and familiar in conversation, and pleasant too, but not to tiresomeness and excess. As for his health, he was not anxious about it, like one fond of living, or over-studious of bodily appearance, and yet managed his constitution with that care as seldom to stand in need of the assistance of physics or outward applications. Farther, he never envied and browbeat those that were eminent in any faculty or science, as eloquence or knowledge of the laws or morals, but on the contrary encouraged them in their ways and promoted their reputation. He observed fitness and custom in all his actions, and yet did not seem to regard them. He was not fickle and fluttering in his humour, but constant both to place and undertaking. And I've seen him, after violent fits of the headache, return fresh and vigorous to his usual business. He kept but few things to himself, and those were secrets of government. He was very moderate and frugal in shows, public buildings, liberalities and such like, being one that did not so much regard the popularity as the rightness of an action. It was none of his custom to bathe at unusual hours or to be overcome with the fancy of building, to study eating and luxury, to value the curiosity of his clothes or the shape and person of his servants. His cloak came from Lorium, his villa on the coast at Lanuvium. He wore, for the most part, only a tunic, and at Tusculum he would scarcely so much as put on a cloak without making an excuse for it. To take him altogether, there was nothing of ruggedness, immodesty, or eagerness in his temper. Neither did he ever seem to drudge and sweat at the helm. Things were dispatched at leisure and without being felt, and yet the administration was carried on without confusion, with great order, force, and uniformity. Upon the whole, what was told of Socrates is applicable to him, for he was so much master of himself that he could either take or leave those conveniences of life with respect to which most people are either uneasy without them or intemperate with them. Now, to hold on with fortitude in one condition and sobriety in the other is a proof of a great soul and an impregnable virtue, such as he showed in the sickness of Maximus. I have to thank the gods that my grandfathers, parents, sister, preceptors, relations, friends, and domestics were almost all of them persons of probity, and that I never happened to disoblige or misbehave myself towards any of them, notwithstanding that my disposition was such that, had occasion offered, I might have acted thus. But by the goodness of the gods, I met with no provocations to reveal my infirmities. It's likewise by their providence that my childhood was no longer managed by my grandfather's mistress, that I preserved the flower of my youth, that I was subject to the emperor my father and bred under him, who was the most proper person living to put me out of conceit with pride, and to convince me that it's possible to live in a palace without the ceremony of guards, without richness and distinction of habit, without torches, statues, or such other marks of royalty and state, and that a prince may shrink himself almost into a figure of a private gentleman, and yet act, nevertheless, with all the force and majesty of his character, when the common will requires it. It's the favour of the gods that I happen to meet with a brother whose behaviour and affection is such as to contribute both to my pleasure and improvement. It's also their blessing that my children were neither stupid nor misshapen, that I made no farther advances in rhetoric, poetry, and such other amusements which possibly might have engaged my fancy too far. Had I found myself a considerable proficient, that, without asking, I gave my governors that share of honour which they seemed to desire, and did not put them off from time to time with promises and excuses, because they were yet but young, that I had the happiness of being acquainted with Apollonius, Rusticus, and Maximus, that I have a clear idea of the life in accordance with nature and the impression frequently refreshed, so that, considering the extraordinary assistance and directions of the gods, it's impossible for me to miss the road of nature, unless by refusing to be guided by the dictates and almost sensible inspirations of heaven. It's by their favour that my constitution has held out so well, under a life of fatigue and business, that I never had to do with Benedicta or Theodotus. And when I fell into some fits of love, I was soon cured, that when I fell out with Rusticus, as it frequently happened, I was not transported into any act of violence, that I had the satisfaction of my mother's life and company and considerable while, though she was destined to die young, that when I was willing to relieve the necessities of others, I was never told that the exchequer was empty, and again it is they that kept me from standing in need of any man's fortune. Father, it is from them that my wife is so very obedient and affectionate, and so remote from luxury, that I had choice of good governors for my children, that remedies were prescribed me in a dream against giddiness and spitting of blood, as at Cagetta, by an ointment that when I had a mind to look into philosophy, I did not meet with a sophist to instruct me, that I did not spend too much time in reading history, chopping logic, or considering the heavens. Now all these points could never have been compassed without a protection from above and the gods presiding over fate. This was written in the country of the Quadi at the Granua. Book 2. Remember to put yourself in mind every morning, that before night it will be your luck to meet with some busybody, with some ungrateful, abusive fellow, with some knavish, envious or unsociable churl or other. Now all this perverseness in them proceeds from their ignorance of good and evil. And since it has fallen to my share to understand the natural beauty of a good action, and the deformity of an ill one, since I'm satisfied the person disobliging is of kin to me, and though we're not just of the same flesh and blood, yet our minds are nearly related, being both extracted from the deity. I'm likewise convinced that no man can do me a real injury, because no man can force me to misbehave myself, nor can I find it in my heart to hate or to be angry with one of my own nature and family. For we're all made from mutual assistance, as the feet, the hands and the eyelids, as the rows of the upper and under teeth, from whence it follows that clashing and opposition is perfectly unnatural. Now such an unfriendly disposition is implied in resentment and aversion. This being of mine, all there is of it, consists of flesh, breath, and the ruling part. Away with your books then. Suffer not your mind any more to be distracted. It's not permitted. As for your body, value it no more than if you were just expiring. For what is it? Nothing but little blood and bones, a piece of network wrought out of nerves, veins and arteries twisted together. In the next place, consider what sort of things your breath is. Why, only a little air, and that not constant, but every moment let out of your lungs and sucked in again. The third part of your composition is the ruling part. Now consider thus, you're an old man. Do not suffer this noble part of you under servitude any longer. Let it not be moved by the springs of selfish passions. Let it not quarrel with fate, be uneasy at the present, or afraid of the future. Providence shines clearly through the works of the gods. Even the works of chance are not without dependence on nature, being only an effect of that chain of cause which are under a providential regulation. Indeed, all things flow from this fountain. Besides, there is necessity and the interest of the whole universe of which you're a part. Now that which is both the product and support of universal nature must by consequence be serviceable to every part of it. But the world subsists upon change, and is preserved by the mutation of the simple elements, and also of things mixed and compounded, and what it loses one way it gets another. Let these reflections satisfy you and make them your rule to live by. As for books, cast away your thirst after them, that you may not die complaining. but go off in good humour and heartily thank the gods for what you have had. Remember how often you've postponed minding your interest and let slip those opportunities the gods have given you. It's now high time to consider what sort of world you're a part of, and from what kind of governor of it you are descended, that you have a set period assigned you to act in, and unless you improve it to brighten and compose your thoughts, it will quickly run off with you and be lost beyond recovery. Take care always to remember that you're a man and a Roman, and let every action be done with perfect and unaffected gravity, humanity, freedom and justice. And be sure you entertain no fancies which may give check to these qualities. This is possible if you will but perform every action as though it were your last. If your appetite and passions do not cross upon your reason, if you keep clear of rashness, and have nothing of insecurity and self-love to infect you, and do not complain of your destiny. You see what a few points a man has to gain in order to attain to a godlike way of living. For he that comes thus far performs all which the immortal powers will require of him. Continue to dishonour yourself, my soul, neither will you have much time left to do yourself honour. For the life of each man is almost up already, and yet instead of paying a due regard to yourself, you place your happiness in the souls of other men. Do not let accidents disturb or outward objects engross your thoughts, but keep your mind quiet and disengaged, that you may be at leisure to learn something good, and cease rambling from one thing to another. There is likewise another sort of roving to be avoided. For some people are busy and yet do nothing. They fatigue and wear themselves out and yet aim at no goal, nor propose any general end of action or design. A man can rarely be unhappy by being ignorant of another's thoughts, but he that does not attend to the motions of his own is certainly unhappy. These reflections ought always to be at hand, to consider well the nature of the universe and my own nature, together with the relation betwixt them, and what kind of part it is, of what kind of whole, and that no mortal can hinder me from acting and speaking conformably to the being of which I'm a part. Theophrastus, in comparing the degrees of faults, as men would commonly distinguish them, talks like a philosopher when he affirms that those instances of misbehaviour which proceed from desire are greater than those of which anger is the occasion. For a man that is angry seems to quit his hold of reason unwillingly and with pain, and start out to rule before he's aware. But he that runs riot out of desire, being overcome by pleasure, loses all hold on himself and all manly restraint. Well, then, and like a philosopher, he said that he of the two is the more to be condemned that sins with pleasure than he that sins with grief. For the first looks like an injured person and is vexed, and as it were forced into a passion, whereas the other begins with inclination and commits the fault through desire. Manage all your actions, words and thoughts accordingly, since you may at any moment quit life. And what great matter is the business of dying? If the gods are in being, you can suffer nothing, for they will do you no harm. And if they're not, or take no care of us mortals, why then a world without either gods or providence is not worth a man's while to live in? But in truth, the being of the gods and their concern in human affairs is beyond dispute, and they've put it entirely in a man's power not to fall into any calamity properly so called. And if other misfortunes had been really evils, they would have provided against them too, and furnished man with capacity to avoid them. But how can that which cannot make the man worse make his life so? I can never be persuaded that the universal nature neglected these matters through want of knowledge, or having that, yet lacked the power to prevent or correct the error, or that nature should commit such a fault through want of power or skill, as to suffer things really good and evil to happen promiscuously to good and bad men, now living and dying, honour and infamy, pleasure and pain, riches and poverty. All these things are the common allotment of the virtuous and vicious, because they have nothing intrinsically noble or base in their nature, and therefore, to speak properly, are neither good nor bad. Consider how quickly all things are dissolved and resolved, the bodies and substances themselves into the matter and substance of the world, and their memories into its general age and time. Consider too the objects of sense, particularly those which charm us with pleasure, frighten us with pain, or are most admired for empty reputation. The power of thought will show a man how insignificant, despicable, and paltry these things are, and how soon they wither and die. It will show him what those people are upon whose fancy and good word the being of fame depends. Also the nature of death, which, if one abstracted from the pomp and terror of the idea, will be found nothing more than a pure natural action. Now he that dreads the course of nature is a very child, but this is not only a work of nature, but is also profitable to her. Lastly, we should consider how we're related to the deity and in what part of our own being, and in what part of our being and in what condition of that part. Nothing can be more unhappy than the curiosity of that man that ranges everywhere and digs into the earth, as the poet says, for discovery, that is wonderfully busy to force by conjecture a passage into other people's thoughts, but does not consider that it is sufficient to reverence and serve the divinity within himself. And this service consists in this, that a man keep himself pure from all violent passion and evil affection, from all rashness and vanity, from all manner of discontent towards gods or men. For as for the gods, their administration ought to be revered upon the score of excellency, and as for men, their actions should be well taken for the sake of common kindred. Besides, they are often to be pitied for their ignorance of good and evil, which incapacity of discerning between moral qualities is no less a defect than that of a blind man who cannot distinguish between white and black. Though you were to live 3,000, or if you please 30,000 of years, yet remember that no man can lose any other life than that which he now lives, neither is he possessed of any other than that which he loses. Whence it follows that the longest life, as we commonly speak, and the shortest come all to the same reckoning. For the present is of the same duration everywhere. Everybody's loss, therefore, is of the same bigness, and reaches no further than to a point of time, for no man is capable of losing either the past or the future, for how can one be deprived of what he has not? So that under this consideration, there are two notions worth remembering. One is that nature treads in a circle and has much the same face through the whole course of eternity, and therefore it signifies not at all whether a man stands gazing here 100 or 200, or an infinity of years, for all that he gets by it is only to see the same sights so much the oftener. The other hint is that when the longest and shortest lived person come to die, their loss is equal. They can but lose the present as being the only thing they have. For that which he has not, no man can be truly said to lose. Monimus the Cynic philosopher used to say that all things were but opinions. Now, this saying may undoubtedly prove serviceable, provided one accepts it only as far as it is true. There are several different ways by which a man's soul may do violence to itself. First of all, when it becomes an abscess, and as it were, an excrescence on the universe, as far as in it lies. For to be vexed at anything that happens is a separation of ourselves from nature, in some part of which the nature of all other things are contained. Secondly, it falls under the same misfortune when it hates any person, or goes against him, with an intention of mischief, which is the case of the angry and revengeful. Thirdly, it wrongs itself when it's overcome by pleasure or pain. Fourthly, when it makes use of art, tricking and falsehood in word or action. Fifthly, when it does not know what it would be at in a business, but runs on without thought or design, whereas even the least undertaking ought to be aimed at some end. Now the end of rational beings is to be governed by the law and reason of the most venerable city and constitution. The extent of human life is but a point. Its substance is in perpetual flux, its perceptions dim, and the whole composition of the body tending to corruption. The soul is but a whirl, fortune not to be guessed at, and fame undiscerning. In a word, that which belongs to the body is a flowing river, and what the soul has is but dream and bubble. Life is but a campaign or course of travels, and after fame is oblivion. What is it, then, that will stick by a man? Why, nothing but philosophy. Now this consists in keeping the divinity within us from injury and disgrace, superior to pleasure and pain, doing nothing at random without any dissembling and pretense, and independent of the motions of another. Farther, philosophy brings the mind to take things as they fall, and acquiesce in their distribution, inasmuch as all events proceed from the same cause with itself, and above all, to have an easy prospect of death, as being nothing more than a dissolving of the elements of which each thing is composed. Now, if the elements themselves are never the worse for running off one into another, what if they should all change and be dissolved? Why should any man be concerned at the consequences? All this is but nature's method. Now, nature never does any mischief. Written at Carnuntum. So as you close the pages on this topic, your unconscious now absorbs this learning from today. You can drift so deeply and comfortably asleep with each breath that you take, sleeping perfectly and soundly asleep all night long.